Hi there, Pastor Tim once again, coming into your home for this midweek connection. I say hello to each member of RBC, the children, the boys and girls who are a part of our family, especially the ones in Kids Club who I miss greatly seeing on Wednesday nights. Of course, all the moms and dads, single people, men and women, some folks with gray in their hair like me, others of a younger nature. It's good to have each of you participate this afternoon. It'll just be a few minutes. And last week, I talked about a key. These are some of the old-fashioned keys that you use to stick it into an ignition and turn it, and the car starts. And once you get that key in, the car can go. So it's important to have a key. If you don't have a key, you have to figure out a way to jumpstart it or to finagle it to get it going. I could do that for you, but don't ask me how. It's just a good way to steal cars. But I have a key to the book of Galatians. Most New Testament epistles have a key if you know where to look, know where to find them. Once you see that key, you can get into the book, and the whole book fits together. Galatians is one example, and the key that opens the book of Galatians is the proposition that Paul makes in Galatians 1, 11 and 12. He's going to defend that proposition basically for the rest of the book. So if you understand that key, that proposition, and then see the link, the connection to the rest of the book, you're home free. I mean, it's good. It's easy. And it makes Bible study fun if you understand the structure of how books are put together. In this case, the proposition is verse 11. Let me read it to you. It says, I want you Galatians, brothers, I want you to know. So there's something that he wants them to know. As he writes this book, he has a purpose. Yes, this is his purpose. I want you to know, brothers, sisters, that the good news, which I have proclaimed, the good news about Jesus, is not something that human beings, people, men and women, contrived and made up. No group of people sat in a back room somewhere and thought, we need to come up with a set of good news about Jesus. I tell you what, let's have everybody contribute and add their 2 cents worth, and we'll wrap it up and then we'll send it out. Paul is saying the good news that I'm proclaiming, that I proclaimed to you when I first came to you, you people, is not something that human beings have any part in. They don't have their fingerprints on it at all. And he goes on to make sure that they get that. I didn't receive it from any human. No human being came along with a parchment, some sort of a book or a scroll, and saying, here, Paul, here's the good news that we want you to proclaim. No. No denomination, no group of people, no teachers, no scholars, no priests, no prophets, no kings, no one gave Paul the message that he was proclaiming. He goes on to say, I wasn't taught it. Paul didn't go to school after he became a Christian and learn from some set of apostles. He didn't even learn from Peter or Jacob or John, the inner three of the apostles. He didn't get it from them. You would think that he would. They were with Jesus. But no, Paul says, I didn't get it from them. Even the people that you thought may have been responsible for handing me this truth, I didn't get it from them. He said, in fact, I received it by revelation. The word is apocalypsis. Our word, apocalypse, is from that, but it doesn't mean that. Apocalypsis meaning revealing, unveiling. It's like a curtain being pulled apart and you see something. Something is unveiled, like a brand new car or a brand new toy. Something is unveiled, and it was unveiled to him by Jesus Christ. That's right. So no human being is responsible for the good news he proclaimed. He got it from Jesus alone. That was the one who passed the message on to him as to what he should say. Now the next paragraph begins with the word for. In the Greek language, it's the word gar. Gamma, alpha, rho. 3 little letters. And whenever you see for that begins a verse, You don't want to interpret that verse by itself, or you will surely misinterpret it. Even verses that are familiar to us, like Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, for by grace. That verse is interpreted so many times because people fail to take what's said earlier into consideration. For tells us there's a connection between the next paragraph, verse 13 through 18. There's a connection there. He says, for you know about my former way of life in Judaism. So what Paul is doing us in this next paragraph is that he's explaining how from his own personal life we find evidence that human beings did not provide him with the good news of Jesus. His personal life is brought in to support his argument, his proposition. Let's read that verse. Let's read that paragraph, and we'll see how, from his personal life, he proves that he could not have received good news from people. Check it out. If you have a Bible, follow along. He says, for you as a congregation, or a series of congregations, you've heard of my former way of life in Judaism. Paul was raised as a Jew, born as a Jew. He was an eighth-day boy of the tribe of Benjamin. And he said how intensely I persecuted God's church. And in fact, I tried to destroy it. That's hardly a candidate for someone who is preaching the good news of Jesus. I mean, he was an enemy. He was an adversary. He was not a protagonist. He was an antagonist, and they knew it. They were aware of that. Even in Galatia, a long, long way from where Paul was doing his stuff down in Jerusalem, geographically, that's a long way away, but the news had traveled, and the news was so important and so graphic that it even had made its way all the way up into modern-day Turkey. Galatia. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many Jews of my own age. I was extremely zealous for the tradition of my fathers. So not only was he an antagonist of the gospel, he was a protagonist of his Judaistic religion. So he was an enemy of the gospel of Jesus, but he was Judaism's best friend. And he was the man on the move. He was the young man on the rise. He was the man everyone expected to be at the top of the heap by the time he was middle-aged. He would be number one guy, the man with a Gillette edge, a sharp intellectual who could outdo anybody to defend the tradition of his fathers. Hardly a candidate to be communicating the good news of Jesus. But, to that contrast, this is an important Bible but. You see a but, you have a contrast, you have a change, you have something different. But, when God, who set me apart from my mother's womb. It's interesting that Paul's first miracle was to heal a man who was lame from his mother's womb. It was Peter's first miracle. He also healed a man who was lame from his mother's womb. And Jesus also healed a man who was lame from his mother's womb. Paul says, God set me apart when I was in my mother's womb. God set me apart. God was aware of Paul's existence even in utero. Before he was born, God had plans for him. And he waited and waited and waited until the right time to intervene in his life. God who set me apart from my mother's womb and called me by his grace. Obviously, the call of God for Paul to become a Jesus follower and a protagonist of the good news had to be a call by grace. Grace means what? Grace means that he didn't deserve it. Grace means that the man in his mother's womb, Saul of Tarsus, did not deserve this call. And neither is our call. Paul refers to that call earlier in the book when he says, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you by the grace of Christ. Verse 6. Same phrase. God had called the Galatians to follow Jesus, but that was strictly due to the sovereign call of God. Human beings did not contribute one thing. God did not look down upon us and say, man, they're such fine folks. I think I'm going to call the good ones. If anybody didn't deserve the call, it was Saul. And yet Saul was called by grace. Undeserved favor. Undeserved goodness displayed by God to Saul. He was pleased to reveal his Son in me, so that I might proclaim him among the Gentiles. I didn't consult with any person. Remember his proposition? The gospel I've received is by revelation of Jesus, not from humans. Here he confirms it. I did not consult with any persons, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was. In other words, after he was converted on the Damascus Road in Acts 9, Paul didn't go sit at the apostles' feet. He didn't sit at Peter's feet. He didn't get a blessing from Peter or Paul, or James or Jacob or James or John. He didn't learn the gospel from Jesus. He didn't learn the gospel from Jesus' apostles, Jesus' disciples. There was no human being involved in this process. But I went immediately into Arabia and later returned to Damascus. So from Paul's personal life, his biography during this stage of his life, it was impossible for Paul to have received this wonderful news of Jesus and how to proclaim it, and the content and the nature of the message. There just was not enough time, not enough contact with people for that to happen. The only explanation, Paul says, for why I'm proclaiming what I do, the message of Jesus, the message of justification by faith, is that I got it directly, received it directly from Jesus himself. And so the message that he proclaimed is divine. It has divine authority backing it up. It's not from the church. The church did not give him the good news. The church did not sanction Paul and the message. The church is not responsible for the good news. Neither were any of the apostles, even the chief apostles. Paul's proclamation of the good news was strictly by divine revelation. Therefore, we can trust it. It's a message that comes from God through the most unlikely man ever, Saul of Tarsus. If there ever was a man whom God could have punished, it was Saul. Mean, nasty, obsessive, with murderous intent in his heart, a witness to the death of Stephen, a godly evangelist, and yet the grace of God is amazing. It touches people, the least of which we expect to be touched by God. And that's the message of grace. We'll pick up at the next paragraph, which you can look at yourself and see how it too supports Paul's argument. Thanks for listening. I hope this was clear. I hope it was clear as a spring rain and brought encouragement to your heart as well as confidence, deep confidence and assurance about the good news of Jesus. It's the greatest thing in the world. Thanks for listening. Goodbye and shalom.